Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into one of the shiniest rabbit holes history has to offer literally. You've heard of people writing poetry in candlelight, carving epics into stone, maybe even scribbling love letters on tree bark. But tonight, we're talking about the people who wrote with gold. Yes, you heard that right. Gold. The kind you use to write. Now, you might be thinking, writing with gold dust, were they just ridiculously rich? Well, maybe. But before you roll your eyes, I have to warn you, this journey might take you deep into valleys filled with spices, camels, sandstorms, and ancient conspiracies. Also, a little bit of coughing from dust allergies. You might not survive the first day, but don't worry, I'll be there handing you water. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Your like means as much to me as gold dust does to a sacred manuscript, rare and precious. And don't forget to drop a comment with your city and the current time. Who knows, someone just one town over might be getting ready to time travel with you tonight. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let us ease into tonight's journey together. When you open your eyes, you find yourself in a room where the air is unnervingly still. The walls aren't white, but a kind of yellowish earthen color. Sunlight streams through a circular window hole, casting a golden glow diagonally across the table. You look down, and realize that it's not sunlight, it's the table surface dusted with gold powders so fine it's almost invisible. Sitting by the table is an old man dressed in a brown linen robe. His arms are as thin as vines, yet his movements are incredibly steady. You watch as he dips a feather quill into some gold powder mixed with a milky white liquid and writes carefully on black parchment. The motions don't look like writing, more like weaving cloth. "Don't speak," he says without looking up. "You'll scare the letters away. You dare not move." This is the first time you realize that writing can actually be a high-risk operation. To understand why these people write with gold, we have to start at the beginning, not from the gold powder, but from the act of writing itself. To us modern people, writing is just an ordinary thing. You jot down your shopping list, text your delivery driver a complaint, write an email to quit your job. Writing equals expression. But in many ancient cultures, especially in the highlands of Northeast Africa, this very mysterious, sun-baked, somewhat dry place where you now stand, writing itself was an act of connecting with the divine. Scholars have debated for a century over who were the earliest users of writing, but Ethiopia, or, in earlier times, the Aksumite Empire, has always held a firm place on the high podium in this discussion. They not only developed their own script early on, the Ge'ez script, but also endowed these letters with an almost sacred role. And once letters become vessels of holiness, you naturally want to just grab a charcoal stick and scribble carelessly. You think seriously, is this letter worth writing? Is this paper worthy of carrying this letter, and the ink shouldn't it be something special too? So we arrive at a logic that might make modern people frown but would make ancient ones nod. Since the names of gods are written in holy books, why not write them in gold? Sounds a bit extravagant, yes. But in some historical periods, like medieval Ethiopian highlands, gold was not that rare, at least not as rare as paper. Have you heard of parchment? Well, this isn't just paper with a sheep printed on it, it's real parchment, made by peeling off the skin of a sheep, scraping off the flesh, drying, and stretching it flat for writing. So when gold is dug from the mountains, but the writing surface requires sacrificing an entire sheep, which one is more precious? Isn't so clear-cut anymore. You've even seen this scene in the market, a scribe bargaining, holding a bottle of gold dust in one hand and half a roll of parchment in the other, complaining to the vendor, "This paper is too thin, writing Abraham will tear it." The tone sounds just like your complaints about cheap printer paper. Gradually you realize these people don't write to spread their words, but to preserve them. This isn't for people to read, it's for eternity to see, someone tells you. Then you start noticing a strange detail. The script in these holy books is unusually large, each letter looks like a carefully carved ornament. After writing a word, the scribe often pauses, closes their eyes, and whispers a prayer. And you, standing by the window, watching the sunlight fall on the gold dust, see the letters seem to float up. You can't help but ask, why don't they just use black ink? The old man smiles a smile like a dried olive leaf at the corner of his mouth. Black ink helps people see clearly. Gold dust helps them close their eyes. You didn't understand what he meant then. But it planted a seed that slowly grows in your mind. And this is only the beginning of your journey. In this world where writing is done with gold dust, letters have weight, prayers have color, and faith drifts out from between the lines like sunlight when you unconsciously bow your head. Are you ready to continue? You sit quietly in the corner of that room, sunlight slanting across the golden letters dusted with powder. For a moment, you feel a bit dazed, not because of any religious awe, but because you suddenly realize, here, writing has never been what you thought it was. You thought writing was expression. They believed writing was revelation. You thought writing was spitting out thoughts from your mind. They believed writing was engraving what comes down from heaven into time itself. That contrast feels like you asked to borrow a pen, and instead they hand you a gold-tipped feather quill and ask you to bathe and burn incense first. To understand how this obsession with writing in shining gold began, you dug deeper into history and fell into an even stranger hole. Because you discovered that, in certain periods, writing was actually more solemn and lavish than a noble's engagement ceremony today. Let us travel back for a moment to a place you might never have heard of, but which held enormous prestige in ancient times, the kingdom of Aksum. This ancient kingdom was active roughly from the 1st century BCE in the region of today's Ethiopia and Eritrea. It was neither Egypt nor Rome, but it traded with both. In fact, some Byzantine diplomatic documents even mention the name of the Aksumite king. Scholars still debate whether Aksum was the world's first officially Christian kingdom. Some say Armenia, but Armenia's nobility converted first, whereas in Aksum the king publicly declared, "We believe in Christ." Whoever was first, one thing is clear, they took their faith seriously, especially when it came to writing. You follow the ruins of the royal palace southward and come across a half-buried temple wall inscribed with faint carvings. A local guide wearing a straw hat explains, these are early inscriptions in South Arabian script, recording the deeds of rulers. So they could already write back then, you ask. He laughs, yes, quite early. But back then, writing wasn't for people to read, it was for the gods to see. You try to wrap your mind around this logic. Then think about your social media posts, not really for people to read, but for certain so-and-so to see. And suddenly it feels relatable. The ancient Ethiopians didn't write on paper, they wrote on specially prepared leather parchment made from sheep's skin. Yes, they used hide to write scriptures, sealed and stored in the innermost chambers of palaces or churches. No direct sunlight allowed, no moisture nearby, and not even a glance from bugs. Even more incredible, copying a complete Bible might require sacrificing 300 sheep and take over a decade. And these sheepskins had to be specially crafted by artisans, shaved clean, dried, glued, stretched tight, and scraped smooth sheet by sheet before reaching the scribe's hands. You lift one parchment leaf gently, as if afraid to disturb the breath that hasn't quite left. Its texture gleams faintly amber under the light, its edges curl slightly, as if remembering it was once a living sheep. Then you wonder, Who were the people writing these words? What kind of status did they need to have to be allowed to inscribe these letters? The answer might unsettle you. In that era, writing was not a right of expression or creation, but a duty to carry out the divine will. You didn't decide what to write on a whim. It was a copying order handed down. Not from the emperor, but from the bishop or even higher authorities. And you were just a hand, not the author, nor the reader. You look at the feather quills, the gold powder dishes, the tiny ink bottles, feeling part romance, part neck ache. How many pages can they write in a day? You ask a robed, bespectacled man restoring manuscripts. He grins like he just downed a whole jar of coffee beans. A day, maybe 2 or 3 pages, if lucky. Sometimes half a page. You're shocked. So slow. Because mistakes can't be corrected, he pushes up his glasses, and before writing each letter, they recite a verse silently. So writing a whole Bible means secluding yourself. He nods. Indeed, some monks write from youth to old age, producing only one book in a lifetime. Interestingly, not all texts were written with gold powder. For example, tax ledgers black or red ink would do. Business contracts scribbled hastily in charcoal on thin wooden tablets. Only sacred scriptures, royal decrees, or texts with mystical significance deserved gold. Gold was not just the brightest color, but a seal. You dare not change it because it has already been seen in the light. You recall the phrase written for eternity and suddenly understand a little. You look up at the golden letters shimmering in the daylight. A strange feeling wells up. Are these letters alive, not literally breathing, but echoing in your heart? Each reading seeps slowly into your bones. You try to write a easy letter in your small notebook, clumsy, crooked, like bread dropped and stepped on. But staring at that skewed stroke, you feel a sacred kind of shame. You can't help but think, maybe this is the meaning of gold powder. Not to make you see more clearly, but to remind you that writing itself should never be taken lightly. You sit on a bench in the monastery's courtyard, chewing on a not-so-tasty lentil bread while watching several scribes hunched over their desks like statues in the distance. They are so focused that even birds flying by don't make them look up. You don't get tired. You finally muster the courage to ask. An older scribe slowly looks up, his gaze gentle yet distant. Tiredness is inevitable. But we do not write for ourselves. He pauses, then adds, we are preserving the voice of the world. You don't dare ask more. Because you realize, every word they write is not what I said, but this voice has never disappeared. In this chapter, let us talk about voice, especially in a time without headphones, printers, or even public education. How did people preserve sound? One answer: by writing it down. But for ancient Ethiopians, this writing it down came with very high standards. They not only had to write, but write beautifully, write sacredly, even write with a sense of music. Yes, music. You follow the scribes deep into the monastery, a small room filled with incense and smoke. At the center stands a modest wooden table, on which lies a half-finished manuscript of the Psalms. You had thought it was just another gold-dusted holy book, but a white-robed chanter tells you, this book was written to be sung. Each line corresponds to a melody, he says, softly humming the tune. You watch the letters, which suddenly seem alive, not static, but pulsing with rhythm in your mind. So your writing is also sung, you ask. He nods. We do not just write sound, we seal it into the pages. You think back to your childhood, writing secret diaries, slipping a drawing into a drawer, or quietly carving words under a desk. You had tried to preserve sound too, but you used words. They used sung words. Scholars still debate whether the GEEZ script inherently contains syllabic rhythm and poetic meter. Some linguists believe this ancient writing system was originally designed for chanting. Even the structure of letters had a singing name function. The more you listen, the more incredible it feels. This is no longer just writing a book. It is singing to the future. But why do you use gold powder? You can't help but ask again. Because we hide the voice of God in the light. You chew over this sentence several times before beginning to grasp their obsession. It turns out the gold powder isn't just luxury, but a kind of recording technology. You try to imagine, if a certain sound can only exist in sunlight, how would you capture it? Wouldn't you, like them, choose something that reflects light to seal it? This makes you notice another often overlooked detail: color. Gold powder is dazzling, of course, but it's not the only color. As you flip through the pages, you see some letters decorated with fine red floral patterns, others outlined in blue, and occasional small green leaf motifs. You ask the nearby illustrator, "Do these colors have meanings?" He replies, "Of course. Red is blood and sacrifice, blue is heaven, green is hope, and gold is light. So this is a visual prayer." He looks up at you, eyes saying, "Ah, you finally get it." You begin to notice the details. Gold letters don't just lie flat on the page, they seem to float above it, especially when the light hits just right. There's one page you can't forget. It shows the beginning of Exodus, "Let my people go." Of course, written in GEEZ. Those words glow faintly in gold powder, like Moses himself whispering from the burning bush. You even feel you hear a deep echo. You close the book softly and whisper to yourself, "This is their recording." Interestingly, even the most precious writing process was never a one-person job. A single manuscript was often created by several artisans: scribes, illustrators, parchment preparers, ink grinders, and chanters who provided the rhythm. Each was part of guarding the voice. You see a little boy hand a bottle of beeswax mixture to an illustrator, his face serious as if passing a state secret. You suddenly realize, he's part of this legacy of light and sound too. Even if it's just handing over a bottle of beeswax. Even if it's just grinding some gold powder. You sit back in the courtyard, the still wet golden page beside you softly glowing. And finally, you understand, they aren't wasting gold on paper, they are turning voice into eternal light. In this world, writing can be plain or ornate, charcoal or radiance. But only in this ancient valley did they truly believe that light could speak. You rub your eyes, trying to find an angle between the gold dust and sunlight that won't blind you. Looking at these golden letters, you suddenly realize, you have no idea where this gold dust even comes from. So today, let us switch perspectives. Forget faith, calligraphy, or aesthetics for a moment. Let us talk about one thing: where exactly did ancient Ethiopians get all that gold? And how did they turn it into writing powder? Sounds like a tomb raiding story, right? Don't worry, no graves will be disturbed. But we will have to take a trip into the mountains. You climb aboard a creaky donkey cart and bump along with a group of descendants of ancient miners into the northern Ethiopian highlands. The sun beats down on you like it's got a grudge, and you almost pour your water over your own head instead. The gold mines are just ahead, says a guide who doubles as a history buff. But what you see isn't modern mining pits, it's more like an anthill of stone holes. As you approach those low mine entrances, you start doubting reality. They're just natural rock cracks, with a few simple wooden frames beside them, ropes and bamboo baskets hanging overhead. Yes, that's how the ancients dug gold. This mountain, they say, has been mined since several centuries BC. During the Aksumite period, it flourished. Not only did they export spices and ivory, but gold as well. And that gold wasn't just for making necklaces. Scholars speculate that a good portion of the gold was melted into powder, used on holy books, icons, and sacred vessels. Basically, wherever something needed to be sanctified, gold was applied. How did they grind the gold into powder? As soon as you ask, a few older men nearby laugh as if you just posed a hilarious historical riddle. Do you know what their earliest grinder was? One asks mysteriously. You shake your head. River stones, he answers. Turns out, the earliest method for making gold dust was to place small gold pieces between two smooth river stones and patiently grind them down slowly until fine particles appeared, like grinding tea leaves. Academics still debate just how fine this gold powder was. Some chemical analyses show that some medieval gold dust was ground to a few microns, almost the same fineness as gold powder in modern cosmetics. Imagine that: no electric mixers, no microscopes, just human hands grinding down to that level of fineness. You begin to understand why writing one book could take over a decade. But gold dust alone isn't enough, says an old craftsman who looks like he stepped out of a manuscript. You need to prepare the ink. He leads you to an ancient stone table, on which lie beeswax, tree resin, egg whites, and even fish gallbladder juice. To make gold powder stick to parchment, you need some glue. Otherwise, it just shines and then flakes off. You try to picture a monk writing scripture while mixing egg white ink. It's so vivid, it almost moves you. Turns out, they really had to do everything themselves. Mining gold, grinding dust, making ink, mixing glue, applying gold. Then you ask, how much gold do you need for 1 page of gold lettering? If you write densely, about 1 gram, he weighs his fingers in the air. 1 gram doesn't sound like much, but write 100 pages, that's enough for a small earring. You start seriously pondering this question. Aren't these books actually precious assets? The answer, yes, extremely precious. At the height of the Aksumite kingdom, these handwritten gold-dusted manuscripts were diplomatic gifts to other kingdoms. Historical records say a king once traded an entire gold-dusted Bible and 30 camels for a Byzantine relic box. So these books were like gold bars. Harder to make than gold bars, the craftsman laughs. First you need faith, then sheep, then patience. You nod in understanding, but inside you're thinking, this is the ancient version of a limited collector's edition. This also explains why many manuscripts were so exquisitely designed. Not only were the letters written in gold dust, but bindings used ivory plates or wood frames inlaid with jewels, covers might be embroidered with silk threads or painted with angel wings. These books weren't meant for casual flipping, they were placed on altars, like your family's vintage collector's game cards, precious, admired, but hardly touched. And precisely because of their rarity, they became victims of war and exile. Countless manuscripts were burned, lost, or stolen during enemy invasions. Many Ethiopian manuscripts in world museums today have heartbreaking stories of crossing oceans and continents. You gently stroke a page, faded but still shimmering with gold. It was written by a monk hundreds of years ago, after countless nights of labor. At that moment, you understand, this is not just a book. It's time compressed into pages of light and shadow. You quietly whisper a prayer in Ge'ez, though your pronunciation might sound like you're calling for breakfast. But it's okay, you're answering the voice sent from that time. You step straight into a puddle in the monastery's backyard, the cold water nearly making you forget the Ge'ez alphabet you just carried in. Looking down, you see a few yellowed sheets of parchment floating on the surface, as if reminding you, you're only just beginning. We already know the gold dust comes from the mountains, and the ink is made from egg whites and fish gall. But here's the question: where does the paper for writing these golden letters come from? The answer is, not paper, but skin. parchment. Sheepskin parchment. This chapter starts with the writing medium, and talks about those things that look like paper, feel like skin, and behind them hide an entire sacred anatomy story. You follow an elderly monk outside the monastery to a drying yard. He waves his hand. Every sheet of paper you see used to bleat. You look down and see the stretched sheepskins nailed flat to wooden frames, drying under the sun like pale yellow glass. The edges ripple irregularly, as if bitten by time. Each sheet of parchment has undergone a purification, the monk says, not like describing a craft, but speaking of a ritual. The process of making parchment sounds like alchemy. Step 1. Slaughter sheep. Of course, not just to make books. The skins come from sheep already destined for food. You even read records saying monks sometimes deliberately chose lamb skins because they're finer and softer, perfect for special chapters like the Gospel openings. Step 2. Dehairing. You watch as they soak the skins in a foul-smelling alkaline liquid, said to be a mixture of lime and urine. Don't ask who discovered this recipe. It was probably someone who fell into a sheep pen by accident. After dehairing, they scrape the skins clean with a curved knife, careful not to cut through. One slip and the entire skin is ruined. You learn a fact: ancient writing demanded not just patience, but precision as steady as a microsculptor. Step 3. Stretching and drying. The skins are nailed to special frames and dried like nets in the sun. Some monasteries even have dedicated parchment drying rooms, with east-facing windows so morning light gently blesses these skins destined to become parts of holy books. You ask the monk, how many sheets does a book usually take? He thinks, 50 to 100 sheets, all cut by hand. You mean dozens of sheep per book, you exclaim. He nods, adding, we pray the sheep understand their skins become God's cloth. You fall silent, your mind once again blown by the cost of these books. Scholars still dig into the craft of Ethiopian parchment making. Some studies suggest Ethiopian parchment is generally thinner, smoother, and more translucent than European counterparts. This translucency makes it ideal for gold dust letters. The metallic shine appears to float on the surface. You suddenly realize, this is an ecosystem. Gold dust needs parchment to reflect light, parchment needs gentle treatment to carry letters. Like a sacred ritual, every step linked, every moment solemn. You enter the scriptorium, where young scribes practice writing. Before them lie sharpened reed pens, small clay pots of ink, and damp cloths to wipe mistakes. How can you avoid errors, you ask? A small monk looks up, grinning. We make mistakes all the time. When we do, we gently scrape the error off with a blade. You lean closer in surprise. Parchment can actually regret. This is called a palimpsest, he explains, demonstrating. You scrape it smooth, apply some egg white, and when dry, you can write again. You learn a new word, rewriting paper. It's not eco-friendly, just practical. The monastery's supply of skins is limited, so mistakes are scraped off and rewritten. Those repeatedly written parchments became treasures for archaeologists. When illuminated with ultraviolet light, hidden earlier texts can be revealed. You see a seemingly clean page glowing under special light. On top is a gospel, underneath a herbal manual. Sometimes, we erase worldly words to write the sacred. This sounds like ripping out old notebook pages to write a diary, but here it carries a kind of compassionate beauty. It also dawns on you, parchment is more than a medium, it has memory. It remembers it was once a sheep, it recalls who scraped it, dried it, wrote on it, it silently accepts corrections and rewriting, it bears humanity's ongoing balance between error and faith. You gently touch a faded sheet, cool yet flexible, like a whisper crossing centuries. When you leave the scriptorium, the sun just touches the western mountain peak, casting golden light. You look back at the parchments, quietly stacked on shelves, tables, and stone frames. Each silent but deeper than any song. Suddenly, you understand, writing is humanity's way of giving voice to silence. Even if that silence once belonged to a little lamb that no longer bleats. You flop down on the stone steps outside the monastery's library, your mind swirling with thoughts of sheep, gold dust, and egg-white ink. Just when you think nothing could surprise you anymore, an old monk in a deep crimson robe ambles over, carrying a book as big as a pizza box. "Want to see something different?" he asks with a smile. You nod, and he opens to the first page, revealing a color illustration. Wait, ancient Ethiopian books have illustrations and colored ones, and they're so beautiful. This chapter is about those miraculous illustrations hidden in the manuscripts. They're not only stunning but reveal the visual universe of a civilization. You lean in, staring at the page. It's the Assumption of Mary. Mary wears a golden crown, stands on fiery clouds, flanked by rows of angels like some kind of heavenly cheer squad. But what really surprises you is the style: rich colors, clear outlines, somewhat like a children's picture book, yet with a touch of tribal art. That's the primary vision, the old monk nods. In our culture, reading is for the heart, but pictures are for the eyes. You must care for both. It sounds like some kind of visual philosophy, but you get it completely. Ethiopian illustration traditions date back at least to the 6th century AD. Back then, monks weren't just scribes, they were painters too. They didn't just write, they painted, ground their own pigments, and made their own brushes. Do you know where the red comes from? He flips to the next page, showing a blazing red background. Insects, he says. You blink. Right, made from a parasitic insect living on cactus plants. When crushed, it makes a red called carmine, now used in lipstick. Your eyes widen. A monk hundreds of years ago painting angels with crushed insect juice. This image almost makes you want to write him a thank you note. What about blue? It's not boiled seawater, it's azurite. You have to mine the stones in the mountains, then grind them into powder, he explains. Looking through the book feels like reading a textbook on color chemistry. Each color is a natural dye, with different sources and crafting processes that rival alchemy. Brushes were handmade too. Feathers, cotton, even cat hair could be tried. As long as it held color, controlled water, and didn't bleed, it was good. Some painters even used hair, he says. You glance down at your own bangs, unwashed for days, suddenly feeling a bit of respect. Scholars still debate whether these illustrations are artistic expression or visual theology. Some historians believe the images aren't mere decoration but a way to preach to the common people. If you can't read, it's okay. You see the angel holding Jesus and instantly understand compassion. Others say these images formed a visual Bible for the semi-literate. Text is hard, but pictures don't lie. You remember your childhood picture books. One worn-out copy of Little Bear's Party lasted you 3 years. Humans have trusted images since then. You start studying the illustrations seriously, and the more you look, the more you realize they aren't static paintings but rhythms. Gestures are dramatic, frozen at key moments, eyes seem to speak directly to you, some figures even gaze at the reader with a stare that says, "Hey, no slacking, time to pray." Our pictures don't follow perspective, the monk chuckles. God is above, not behind. You suddenly understand why the scenes look layered rather than having near and far depth. That's a theological composition logic. You also notice something: the faces in these paintings are authentically black. Unlike some European old books' African caricatures, these figures' faces, skin tones, hairstyles, even clothing come from local Ethiopian life. Of course there are people, he says. Would Mary come flying here and change her face? You laugh at that answer. One page especially grabs your attention, St. George riding a horse slaying a dragon, but the dragon isn't the typical Western serpent. It looks like some African mythical beast, lion paws, a furnace-like mouth, trailing flames. We like to mix and match, the monk grins. We paint Bible stories with our imagination. You realize these illustrations are Ethiopian visual translators. Not copies of the Bible's original look, but digested, absorbed, and re-expressed in local language. You find a fun fact: some pictures have a few lines of secret text underneath. That's a picture text cipher, he explains. It teaches painters how to understand the image, and helps readers find context. You glance at a line that roughly translates, Mary said, "Don't be afraid, that's an angel, not a thief." You chuckle. Turns out even angelic visits need explanations, or they might be mistaken for nighttime burglars. At the last page, you spot a blank corner with just one line, leave space for the next one. You ask what it means. Some manuscripts aren't finished in one go, he says. They're alive, like diaries monks add to them generation after generation. You fall silent, looking again at the illustrations. They are not only faith of ancient people but a heritage of aesthetic transmission. No sound, no words, just pictures speaking. You glance up at a sunlit icon on the stone wall and quietly say to yourself, I get it now. Colors aren't just for beauty, they bring God closer. You're squeezed into a tiny room filled with the smell of parchment and ink. In front of you sits a middle-aged female scribe, delicately dipping a slender reed pen into gold dust, then gracefully inscribing the first letter of the GEEZ alphabet onto the page. She doesn't look up, just softly says, "You know, who writes this book is more important than what's written in it." In this chapter, we're going to talk about the people behind the gold dust, behind the parchment, behind history itself, the scribes, the bookbinders, the collectors, and the decades, lifetimes, even acts of defection they might have sacrificed for a single book. First, you need to understand, a book is a team project. Unlike today, when you jot down notes or doodle in your notebook alone, back then the creation of one book could pass through many hands: the bishop who selects the words, the ink maker who mixes the formulas, the assistant who sharpens the pens, the scribe who, if they look up, will have their nearsightedness worsen by 50 degrees. The illustrators so color-sensitive they can distinguish cochineal from red ochre by nose alone. The proofreading monk known as the harshest and most sarcastic. The bookbinder responsible for covers, stitching, punching holes, sewing, and adding corner ornaments. And the central figure is always the scribe. You watch her write, every stroke seeming like an extension of her breath. You can't help but ask, how many pages can you write in a day? She looks up and thinks for a moment, if no one disturbs me, a page and a half. You nearly knock over your cushion. A page and a half, she smiles. To write precisely, evenly, beautifully you have to be slow. We're writing sacred words, not a shopping list. That's when you realize, writing a book is an art of patience, a practice of faith. You ask if writing is tiring. She says, yes, but every letter is like meditation. She points at the parchment. If you write long enough, you'll hear the letters talking to you. You get a little creeped out, but also a bit envious. But you quickly learn it's not all calm and quiet. Behind bookmaking, there is blood and thunder, well, metaphorically speaking. Outside the monastery, there's a group of wandering scribes. They're not monks, but professional scribes in a semi-nomadic state. You find an old record about one named Darotira, who spent 5 years traveling between 3 towns, copying scriptures, contracts, marriage certificates, and prescriptions for nobles, temples, and merchants. He was basically the freelance writer of his time, a young monk explains with a smile. You think he's the medieval ancestor of freelancers, only with a reed pen instead of a keyboard. In a 14th century letter, you read a poignant story. A scribe named Abon Yosef, dissatisfied with the monastery's corruption over parchment materials, fled in the middle of the night with an unfinished manuscript of Revelation, and finished it in another village. The manuscript is still in the National Library, the librarian tells you. You can see the last few pages have different handwriting that's when he changed his lighting and mood. You stare at the photo. Indeed, the spacing loosens in the final lines, and the gold dust shines brighter, as if to say, finally free. Of course, the effort of the scribes shows not just in content, but also in the book's looks. You notice the important books share one thing: ultra-luxurious covers. Gilded, silver inlaid, gem encrusted, leather embossed. Some books you dare not touch, only look from afar, afraid your oily hands might stain 1,000-year-old agate. We treat books as holy objects, the female scribe says. Binding isn't for beauty, it's to protect the light inside. You nod, then mutter quietly, also way too heavy. She ignores you and dips her pen into the powder for the next page. You see a group of young apprentices sewing the pages together, parchment after parchment in order. Some use thread, some leather strips. Their movements are as skilled as weaving a carpet. This is called the book's clothing, they tell you. A real good book is worn, not just made. You learn another fact: Ethiopian bookbinding techniques relate to Byzantine traditions, and sometimes a sewing pattern is proof of cultural exchange. Some even study the geometric embossing on covers, claiming they hide numerological secrets. Isn't this a bit too much, you ask? We believe God sees the book cover too, a boy whispers. You're momentarily speechless. Scholars still debate today, who really drove the bookmaking system: the monastery's internal organization, or some form of cultural mandate from the state. No definite answer, but you sense it's both. Because you've seen it with your own eyes: monks writing for faith, scribes writing for livelihood, nobles commissioning books for prestige, commoners writing certificates for weddings, doctors writing herbal recipes. Here, books are soul and tool, faith and reality. As you leave the workshop, the sun hangs low over the distant mountains, the air thick with the smell of ink, old paper, leather, and a faint trace of undried gold dust. You suddenly think, these people spent their whole lives making one book, while we swipe past in a second. Maybe next time you turn an ancient page, you'll slow your gaze, touch it more lightly, and quietly say, this is someone's lifetime. You woke up earlier than the chickens, or maybe you never really slept at all. In the night breeze of this highland plateau, the wind sneaks under your blanket, chilling you like an undercooked chickpea. So you wrap yourself in a shawl and head up the hillside to watch the sunrise. The sun hasn't fully appeared yet, but the sky is already dyed a pale golden hue. You stand at the edge of a small village. Next to you, a goat is chewing on something that looks like paper but isn't quite paper. Hey, that's not a page of scripture, is it? You hurriedly pull the crumpled thing from its mouth, a piece of parchment, a loose leaf, covered in strange GEEZ script and stamped with a seal. Squinting, you read, this is a transfer copy, not to be leaked. Today's chapter reveals another mystery hidden behind those gold-dusted scrolls: the ancient Ethiopian book circulation system. In other words, how these things really moved, who got to read them, and how people survived doing it. You follow a local keeper of the books down into his basement. It's not some dark, mysterious movie scene but a well-ventilated room, with wooden shelves arranged neatly and a strong scent of herbs. We don't call this a library, he explains. We call it a house of scriptures. We don't store books, we store souls. You look around. Each shelf holds bundles wrapped in cloth and tied with leather straps, each tagged with names like Life of Mary Northern Copy, or Herbal Compendium Green Variant. He pulls out one bundle and hands it to you. This is a Traveler's edition. You open it. It has fewer pages than the ones you've seen before, and the content is simplified. We make portable copies for merchants, monks, doctors to carry on the road. You're stunned. Ancient Ethiopia already invented pocketbooks, of course, he laughs. They're thicker than your Kindle but much more durable. You ask, how do these books circulate between places? He drops a phrase that blows your mind. There are book caravan teams. You think you misheard, but he continues, a few times a year, people on mules or donkeys form small teams that carry holy books from one monastery to another, then return with new volumes. The system even has fixed routes, schedules, and postmarks, those date stamps on the scripture bundles, basically an ancient Amazon delivery. And they take traditional routes that avoid bandits. These books are incredibly valuable, he says. Worth more than salt. Your mind paints the scene, a rugged mountain path, a caravan braving sun and wind, donkeys not carrying goods but gold-dusted scriptures, wrapped in leather like bricks of gold. But here's the question: who has the right to read these books? Not just anyone. Access is tiered by rank, he says. You widen your eyes, so even back then there was a kind of paywall. Roughly 3 levels: public edition, excerpts, stories, fables used for sermons and daily teaching; mid-level copies, medical texts, laws, ritual protocols usually for local leaders or healers; high-level editions, theological debates, symbolic interpretations, secret prophecies read only by bishops. And those glittering gold dust scrolls mostly belong to the third category. Do you have access? You ask the keeper. He smiles. Some books can only be read in dreams. You think he's joking, until he says, we believe some scriptures cannot be read with the eyes but must be known through dreams and special prayer states. Suddenly you understand it's not a joke. It's their profound respect for the sacred boundary. Book transfers are often accompanied by rituals. For example, when an important scripture is sent from one monastery to another, a sending prayer ceremony is held. You attend one. The whole village comes out to see it off. The scroll is wrapped in 5 layers of cloth, carried in turns by 2 elders, who sing psalms all along the way. We don't just send a book, one elder tells you, we escort a living consciousness. You nod, but can't help thinking, if they ever escort a cell phone, it'll probably be with incense, drums, and 3 kowtows. You sneak a question: are there books that are never sent out? He falls silent for a moment. Yes, he says. We call them sealed scrolls. What do you mean? They must never travel far, only be read, guarded, and aged in their place of origin. You press for reasons, but he only says, some contents aren't meant for spreading. Some powers can't leave their roots. You shiver a bit but mostly feel awe. You also hear about a curious practice: some books, once copied, are buried inside temple walls. We call them spirit-sealed volumes, he explains. To feed the walls, so the building itself carries holiness. You're stunned. It's like using knowledge as building material. That's our theological concrete, he jokes. You laugh but seriously think, this civilization's understanding of books is far beyond mere information transfer. They see books as having weight, soul, and energy fields. Scholars debate if these sealed scrolls truly work. Some say it's mythologized folklore. Others insist the practice strengthened cultural cohesion. Whatever the truth, the reality is, most of these books still lie where they were made, deeply rooted like underground networks in stone walls and earth mounds. When you leave the scripture house, the keeper gives you a reproduction leaf. Not the original, but you can carry it on your journey. You carefully tuck the parchment away. On it is a line in Geez, you understand, travelers do not walk, they carry light. You read it twice quietly. Then the sun rises, and you walk down the hill, feeling like you've just returned from another world. At the foot of the mountain, in a small marketplace, you've just taken a bite of grilled flatbread when an old man quietly slides onto the bench beside you. His robe is faded from sweat and years of wear, and there's a parrot on his shoulder that looks like it has a lot of opinions. Ever heard of a night scribe, he asks, his voice so low it nearly gets blown away by the wind. You freeze mid-chew, then nod instinctively. Of course, you've never heard of such a thing. But in moments like this, nodding is the only correct response. So he continues talking, as if you were already half an insider. The real gold dust scrolls, he says, aren't written during the day. That kind of light's too vulgar. Today, we're diving into the actual practices of Ethiopian manuscript scribes, especially one mysterious and deeply ritualistic role, the night scribe. Yes, those who only write under moonlight. Let's set the scene first. You're sitting in a small stone hut. Thick cloth seals all the doors and windows, and there's just one hole in the roof that lets a shaft of silver moonlight spill directly onto the parchment below. In your hand is a finely cut reed pen. Your right hand dips gently into gold dust ink, while your left holds the edge of the parchment steady. The air smells of incense, and faint drum beats pulse slowly from the eastern wall. You can't start writing yet, because you have to wait for the herb clock moment. You're not quite sure when exactly that is. It's not like a clock you can set, it's more like a feeling. The moment when everything quiets down, the breeze softens, and the insects suddenly go quiet. That's the work environment of a night scribe, quiet, sacred, and meticulously timed. Why not write during the day? Isn't the light better? You ask this very modern question, and the old man waves his hand dismissively. Sunlight's too bright. You won't see the spirit clearly. It sounds like nonsense until you realize what he means. The sun is for the flesh, the moon is for the soul. Gold ink settles and adheres better under moonlight. That's a fun fact. Many scribes believed that the moon's tidal pull helped parchment absorb ink more smoothly. Also, the moon's steady coolness prevents the parchment from warping or curling. You try painting with gold dust in daylight and the page edges curl like they're trying to run away. Only letters written at night will behave, the old man chuckles. Night scribes were often the highest ranked scribes in the monastery, but they rarely took part in daytime activities. They were like a textual version of night priests, silence and fasting during the day. A ritual bath at dusk before entering the scriptorium. Work strictly confined between moonrise and first light. They wrote very slowly, sometimes only finishing 2 paragraphs a night. Not because they were lazy, but because each word was preceded by 3 internal prayers. Each passage was dried and tapped 10 times with a soft cloth. Mistakes couldn't be erased. The entire page had to be rewritten. You don't slap divine names with correction fluid. You can't help but ask, weren't they exhausted? The old man stares toward the mountains. Of course. But it wasn't writing. It was a way of breathing. And then you notice something else. Night scribes' toolkits were way more complicated than you'd imagined. You thought they just needed pen and ink, but they also carried a purity stone for cleaning residual gold ink from pen tips, a small vial of moon oil, a mix of ether oil and rose, used to prep the parchment, a prayer cloth, placed on finished pages to absorb moisture and impart blessings, a carved wooden ruler. Each line had to be the exact same height, the divine one to tolerate visual imbalance. It's no wonder some gold dust scrolls took 3 years to complete. But you still can't help asking a very practical question: if they only work at night, how do they tell colors apart? The old man pulls out something strange, a jagged stone embedded with glowing beetle shells. "This is a night mirror," he says. It's supposedly a translucent mineral from the Red Sea coast that reflects colors differently in dim light like a natural nocturnal filter. We use it to check the purity of gold, and to proofread writing. At this point, you're thinking this isn't scribal work. This is alchemy. But not every night scribe makes it. Some go mute, the old man says. Others, their pens keep breaking halfway through. Why, you ask? Maybe the spirit refuses to reveal itself. Or, maybe their heart's not still enough. Sounds pretty mystical, but when you recall the slow movements, the prayers, the chants, the rhythmic silence, you begin to wonder if they really do access some kind of altered state. Academics still argue whether night scribes were real or just monastic legends. Some think the stories are exaggerations. Others claim to have found traces of gold dust ink that only show under moonlight. True or not, you realize one thing: these people weren't writing to record words. They were carving the shadow of faith into the night. Before you leave the marketplace, you spot the old man gently stroking a page of gold scripted text with his fingertip. "Did you write this?" you ask. He doesn't answer. He just whispers, "Light isn't for seeing. Light is for remembering." You never see that parrot again. Like the letters themselves, it quietly disappears into the night. Your back aches a little, and your feet still tingle from the climb up the mountain trail. But you've finally made it to the rooftop platform of this secluded monastery. The night wind cuts sharp and cool as you rub your shoulders and glance down at the courtyard below. A circle of monks are gathered around a fire, chanting softly and tossing glittering powders into the flames. You ask, are they doing alchemy? A monk in a felt cloak pats your shoulder. "No," he says. "They're mixing ink." That's right. Tonight, you're finally uncovering the mystery. How is gold dust ink actually made? And the process turns out to be far more complicated than you imagined. Part chemistry, part magical ritual. First, you have to understand, Ethiopian gold dust ink isn't just gold and water and glue. Most people think you can simply grind gold into powder and write with it. Right? Wrong. The kind of gold powder that can actually be used for writing has to meet a ridiculous number of conditions. It must be extremely pure, ultrafine, and completely oil-free. Sounds hard enough already, but there's more. For example, you can't use smelted and purified gold ingots. It must be naturally weathered gold fragments. And it can only be ground using a gooseneck mortar and pestle. Apparently, other shapes don't yield the right flow. You watch as a monk gently pours a handful of golden sand into a stone mortar, then adds a dark liquid that looks like ink. That's tamarind way, he explains with a smile. We boil unripe tamarinds to soften the gold grains. This is the first step of making gold ink, gold washing. After washing, the sediment golden mud is spread out on parchment to dry, and then painstakingly crushed using a shard of obsidian. You can't press too hard, he says. It has to break willingly, just with the warmth of your hand. You almost blurt out, "Why is your relationship with gold so emotional?" Well, maybe they have a point. Because next, the gold powder is mixed with something called innkeeper's elixir. The recipe is a tightly guarded secret, but it's rumored to include gelatin made from simmered lamb tendons, a resin that blooms only during specific rainy seasons, something called blue gall leaf, a painfully bitter, aromatic herb. The mixing must be performed by two people, one stirring, the other chanting. Their breathing and rhythm must be perfectly in sync. Otherwise, the gold will sink, and the batch will break its tendon. You stand nearby sweating nervously, terrified your breathing might mess up the ritual. At last, the prepared ink is poured into a goat horn bottle. Not just any container, the bottle is carved with geometric patterns, sealed with beeswax, and tied with a red thread and a tiny feather. Gold ink can't be sealed tight, the monk says gravely. It needs to breathe. Otherwise, it goes mute. You glance down, the bottle cap does, indeed, have a minuscule air hole, left deliberately open. Suddenly, it hits you, this whole process isn't technical, it's devotional. What you're witnessing isn't a craft. It's a ritual. You can't help asking, is it really worth all this effort, just to write? The monk glances at you without answering. Instead, he pulls out a parchment scroll from under his cloak. He gently tilts it toward the firelight. Letters shimmer faintly, not glowing, but radiating a kind of soft warmth, like moonlight hiding in the texture of leather. Letters will age. Paper will rot. Ink will fade, he says. But gold. 1T. We're not writing words. We're writing embers of belief. You want to argue, but you find yourself silent. Of course, not every gold dust scroll from ancient Ethiopia survived. Historians note that many were destroyed in war and fire. Some were torn apart during migration, leaving only fragments. Others ended up in collectors' hands, cut into art pieces for sale. Scholars are still studying these manuscripts, but the biggest problem remains: we've lost too many original recipes and notes. Some believe the true formula of the innkeeper's elixir is gone forever. Others suspect the gold powder was coated with some natural preservative, but none of this is proven. So every study lands in the same frustrating paradox: we know it existed, but we can't recreate it. Night has deepened. You lie on the rooftop platform, gazing at the stars. Your mind isn't filled with words, but with wisps of golden smoke. You remember what the monk said: gold is the language of silence. And you begin to understand this ink is not just a technique. It's a civilization's stubborn attempt to speak to eternity. Gold writes neither fast nor much, but once written, it can't be blown away. You turn to your notebook and write a line in the corner: maybe gold dust scripture was never meant to be read by eyes. Yes. It was written for time itself. You've finally decided to visit a legendary place. Not the tomb of some saint, nor a hidden treasure cave, but a library. Don't get the wrong idea, though. This isn't the kind of library with librarians, fluorescent lights, and please keep quiet signs. You're standing in front of a stone cottage. Bundles of dried herbs hang under the eaves, and the walls are carved with geometric patterns. The wooden door creaks open. An old man with a face like wrinkled parchment peers out at you and grins, his smile as dry and solid as aged goat cheese. You hear to see the gold letters. You nod. He nods too, then slowly turns around and walks inside. You follow. This is one of the hiding places of the gold dust scrolls. And once inside, you're stunned. The room isn't large, but it feels like you've stepped into an inverted well of time. All four walls are carved with stone alcoves, each lined with tightly rolled scrolls wrapped in leather. In the center stands a low wooden table, holding a few dried rose petals and an open page from a golden manuscript, as if it's waiting for you to wake it from its sleep. The air doesn't smell musty or damp. Instead, there's a strange blend of metallic sharpness and cheap fat waxiness, a scent like time itself exhaling. You step closer to the open scroll and glance down. The letters glint with a deep, soft golden hue. Each stroke is sharp and elegant, like ripples carved by a blade across water. You nearly reach out to touch it when the scroll keeper suddenly clears his throat. Don't. The gold remembers your body heat. You jerk your hand back like you've been shocked. Your first lesson is this: gold dust manuscripts are not only hard to write, they're even harder to preserve. Because gold dust doesn't absorb into parchment the way ink does. It doesn't bind. It doesn't stain. It only adheres. Which means, even the slightest touch, one fingertip's worth of skin oil, could cause discoloration or flaking, even if it's invisible to the eye. So these scrolls are never handled by hand. We use feather wands. The scroll keeper produces a long, delicate bird feather and gently teases the edge of the page, like coaxing a dreaming cat. You ask, how often do you turn the pages? Once every 15 years, on average. You almost laugh, thinking he's joking. Not yearly. Not monthly. Every 15 years. Turning a page, he says slowly, is a test and a farewell. If it starts flaking, we seal it forever. Your heart skips a beat. These letters. They're more alive than you thought. You can't help but ask, what do the gold letters say? He nods and leads you to a more concealed alcove along the eastern wall. From it, he carefully retrieves a particularly old scroll and slowly unrolls it. The first page reads, "The Book of Enoch, Third Commentary." Your eyes light up. That's one of the apocryphal Judeo-Christian texts, long lost in most traditions. That's right, ancient Ethiopia not only preserved rare scriptures but also developed its own commentary traditions. Some of them mixed Old Testament ideas with local legends or even hints of astrology. You read the golden passages. The angel's bones melt in a golden rain, becoming dusts of truth. The mountains breathe in turn, each in one of 7 colors. God's voice strikes at the 3rd hour past midnight, like a furnace beating gold. You're holding your breath now, not reading so much as slipping into a dream made of symbols. You ask, how many people can still understand this? Understand. The scroll keeper's tone is calm. Those who truly did are already dead. You blink. He continues, modern readers look at this and say beautiful or strange. But back then, every sentence had a corresponding gesture, a chant, even a breathing rhythm. You imagine the scene: one night scribe, one oil lamp, one gold dust pen no thicker than a strand of hair. After every sentence, he would pause and inhale gently, as if conversing with something or someone not visible in the room. These scrolls weren't written for the eyes, the old man says. They were written for memory's depths. You ask one final question, then why preserve them if no one can read them anymore? He smiles but doesn't answer right away. Instead, he retrieves a small bundle from the corner, unwraps it carefully, and reveals a tiny fragment of parchment. Just a few lines remain. A single surviving golden phrase sits near the top, right at the edge of your ability to see. May this light sink into parchment, and never fade. He wraps it up again with great care. It's not about whether we understand, he says softly. It's about staying with it. Letting it stay with us. And in that moment, you understand, these scrolls have long since outgrown their content. They have become evidence of existence. Like the stars. You may not know what they're saying. But you know they are there. And once they lit the dark, you wake up a little early. It's still dark outside, but you can already hear the distant crowing of roosters and the murmuring wheels of donkey carts. You tiptoe out of the little hut, careful not to wake the scroll keeper from last night. He sleeps as quietly as a parchment codex. You circle around the library once, and on the western wall, you stumble across a strange mural. Or rather, it looks like a mural, but it's actually a wall embedded with gold lettering. Lines of vertical script weathered by wind, rain, and sun for at least a few centuries. What shocks you most is this: they're not paintings. They're writings. You reach out and touch the surface. It's not paint, nor carving. It feels like metal powder fused into the wall, like gold leaf with a subtle, sandy texture. You can't help but blurt out, why would they write in gold, even on the wall? An older monk strolls over, smiling slowly. That's not a wall, he says. It's a door. You freeze. He points to a specific section of the gold-lettered wall and says, this passage is called the speech of the sleeper. And just like that, you learn a new concept today: gold script isn't always meant to be read. Sometimes, it's meant to guard. In ancient Ethiopian theology, gold dust writings weren't always created for comprehension. Sometimes, they functioned as a kind of barrier. Take this wall, for example. It was supposedly built in the 6th century, during a devastating plague. The monks transcribed the most sacred scripture in gold ink and wrote it on the library's outer wall, hoping to seal the disaster out. And it wasn't an isolated case. Historians point out, in the southern Tigray highlands, gold lettering was found on doorframes of many cave churches. Some golden inscriptions were buried beneath foundations, believed to bless and anchor the land. Sarcophagi lids in certain tombs were coated in gold script to act as soul guardians. You listen in silence, thinking, these people didn't just write to communicate. They wrote to cast spells. You ask the monk, do these golden walls still work? Can they really keep anything out? He squints, as if thinking hard, then says something you weren't at all prepared to hear: we don't know if they still work. But the disasters haven't come back. You look back at the wall, half skeptical. Then you recall what the scroll keeper told you last night: words live alongside time. Maybe the golden script wasn't meant to block disaster, but to remind it, you've already been here. We still remember you. It's a way of turning wounds into inscriptions. You go on to visit some older ruins. The one that stuns you most is a half-collapsed mountain cave church. The cave isn't big, but the walls and ceiling are covered in spiderweb fine trails of golden letters. You flick on your flashlight and look closely. The gold lines seem to grow from the stone itself. The strokes are delicate, perfectly aligned, with a rhythm that feels almost inhuman, like they weren't scribbled, but composed with a kind of sacred meter. A young scholar whispers beside you, this is called the rhythmic gospel method. Before gold ink was applied, the scribe would sketch guidelines in charcoal, then write step by step according to the rhythm of their breath. It's a bit like musical notation, she says. Only it's not for music, it's for the words of God. You freeze. Because you suddenly realize these golden lines weren't written to be read. They were written to be sung. Each row of script might not correspond to a sentence, but to a melodic tone, a chant, or sacred intonation. You ask, can anyone still read it now? No one dares, the scholar replies softly. Not because we can't understand, but because reading them aloud would be a summoning. She pauses. Scholars still debate it. Some say it's superstition, others claim it's just an ancient recitation method. But either way, no one wants to risk it. And you understand. This isn't fear. This is respect for sound, for language, for what it might awaken. Because once a gold script is voiced aloud, it's no longer inert. It becomes echo. And echoes answer. You stand in the echoing valley of stone, listening to the scholar murmur one final line aloud, barely audible. All things sink into sound. Only names remain afloat. You close your eyes instinctively, and for a moment, you swear you hear something older, deeper, drifting through the night air from those ancient cave walls, a whisper of gold. And in that instant, you understand, gold was never just ink. It was the most intimate, the most thunderous confession a civilization could offer. A message for your time. And you're merely eavesdropping. You wake up a little early. It's still dark outside, but you can already hear the distant crowing of roosters and the murmuring wheels of donkey carts. You tiptoe out of the little hut, careful not to wake the scroll keeper from last night. He sleeps as quietly as a parchment codex. You circle around the library once, and on the western wall, you stumble across a strange mural. Or rather, it looks like a mural, but it's actually a wall embedded with gold lettering. Lines of vertical script weathered by wind, rain, and sun for at least a few centuries. What shocks you most is this: they're not paintings. They're writings. You reach out and touch the surface. It's not paint, nor carving. It feels like metal powder fused into the wall, like gold leaf with a subtle, sandy texture. You can't help but blurt out, why would they write in gold, even on the wall? An older monk strolls over, smiling slowly. That's not a wall, he says. It's a door. You freeze. He points to a specific section of the gold-lettered wall and says, this passage is called the speech of the sleeper. And just like that, you learn a new concept today. Gold script isn't always meant to be read. Sometimes, it's meant to guard. In ancient Ethiopian theology, gold dust writings weren't always created for comprehension. Sometimes, they functioned as a kind of barrier. Take this wall, for example. It was supposedly built in the 6th century, during a devastating plague. The monks transcribed the most sacred scripture in gold ink and wrote it on the library's outer wall, hoping to seal the disaster out. And it wasn't an isolated case. Historians point out, in the southern Tigray highlands, gold lettering was found on doorframes of many cave churches. Some golden inscriptions were buried beneath foundations, believed to bless and anchor the land. Sarcophagi lids in certain tombs were coated in gold script to act as soul guardians. You listen in silence, thinking, these people didn't just write to communicate. They wrote to cast spells. You ask the monk, do these golden walls still work? Can they really keep anything out? He squints, as if thinking hard, then says something you weren't at all prepared to hear. We don't know if they still work. But the disasters haven't come back. You look back at the wall, half skeptical. Then you recall what the scroll keeper told you last night, words live alongside time. Maybe the golden script wasn't meant to block disaster, but to remind it, you've already been here. We still remember you. It's a way of turning wounds into inscriptions. You go on to visit some older ruins. The one that stuns you most is a half-collapsed mountain cave church. The cave isn't big, but the walls and ceiling are covered in spiderweb fine trails of golden letters. You flick on your flashlight and look closely. The gold lines seem to grow from the stone itself. The strokes are delicate, perfectly aligned, with a rhythm that feels almost inhuman, like they weren't scribbled, but composed with a kind of sacred meter. A young scholar whispers beside you, this is called the rhythmic gospel method. Before gold ink was applied, the scribe would sketch guidelines in charcoal, then write step by step according to the rhythm of their breath. It's a bit like musical notation, she says. Only it's not for music, it's for the words of God. You freeze. Because you suddenly realize these golden lines weren't written to be read. They were written to be sung. Each row of script might not correspond to a sentence, but to a melodic tone, a chant, or sacred intonation. You ask, can anyone still read it now? No one dares, the scholar replies softly. Not because we can't understand, but because reading them aloud would be a summoning. She pauses. Scholars still debate it. Some say it's superstition, others claim it's just an ancient recitation method. But either way, no one wants to risk it. And you understand. This isn't fear. This is respect for sound, for language, for what it might awaken. Because once a gold script is voiced aloud, it's no longer inert. It becomes echo. And echoes answer. You stand in the echoing valley of stone, listening to the scholar murmur one final line aloud, barely audible. All things sink into sound. Only names remain afloat. You close your eyes instinctively, and for a moment, you swear you hear something older, deeper, drifting through the night air from those ancient cave walls, a whisper of gold. And in that instant, you understand, gold was never just ink. It was the most intimate, the most thunderous confession a civilization could offer. A message for your time. And you're merely eavesdropping. Today, you didn't visit a church, climb a mountain, or read any scriptures. You did something much harder. You went looking for the person who makes gold letters. Or rather, the person who makes the gold dust. You were expecting some elderly alchemist, or maybe a hunched dwarf lugging sacks of secret silver. Instead, the person turns out to be a very ordinary-looking young man who is currently munching on a corn flatbread. When he sees you, he grins. Wanna see how we make gold script? Fair warning, no magic involved. You follow him into a semi-underground stone room. The air is immediately thick with a metallic tang you can't quite name, mixed with a faint smell of scorched parchment. He pats the stone mortar on the table and says, "Come on. Welcome to the gold kitchen. Your first lesson, gold dust isn't just scraped off a lump of gold." He places a small piece of soft gold about the size of your thumb into the mortar and explains, "First we heat the gold until it softens, then we add some secret ingredients: egg white, powdered myrrh, and finely ground tree resin." You frown. Gold ink needs egg white. Of course. Otherwise it won't stick to the page. Try writing without it. One puff of wind and poof, it's gone. He starts pounding the gold with a wooden pestle, each stroke making a faint thok-thok sound, like a low drum echoing from a distant temple. The more the gold breaks down, the finer and brighter it becomes until it looks like a pile of glowing flour made of light. And then we stir, let it settle, filter, stir again, dry it. Look over there. He points to the corner. A row of little ceramic dishes are lined up, each holding a bit of drying gold powder that shimmers in the morning light like some kind of living thing, gently quivering. You ask, "How long does it take to make one batch?" He thinks. Fastest 3 days. Slowest, 3 months. You freeze. So writing a whole book in gold would take. He finishes for you, years. Now you see why we don't waste any. And that's when it truly hits you, gold dust is time, made visible. It's the product of countless hands, ingredients, sunrises, and sunsets all condensed into that one, tiny pile of glowing dust. But what truly moves you is what he shows you next, the pen. Not a brush. Not a quill. But a hollow silver-tipped rod with an almost invisible nib. You can only see it clearly under a magnifying lens. Every drop of gold ink has to be applied with this, he says. It may look like silver, but the inside is coated with fish glue, otherwise the gold gets stuck. You even spot an inkstone next to him, but it's not the usual black. It has a faint golden shimmer, like ivory dipped in sunlight. Before we write, we sing, he suddenly adds. Hey. He winks, then hums a tune you don't recognize, a kind of breathy melody, and then picks up the silver rod. We don't just write gold. We wake it up. You figured academia would argue about something like this, and sure enough, some historians dismiss the singing ritual as mere scribal superstition. Others, especially scholars of religion, believe it follows a deep mystical logic. The melody stabilizes the gold particles in ink. The rhythm helps the scribe enter a focused, almost trance-like state. Some chants are said to match the grain patterns of the parchment itself. But standing there, watching gold ink flow from that delicate nib, forming the first letter on a sheep-hide scroll, you stop caring about the theories. All you feel is awe. That first stroke looks like sunlight slicing through fog. Wanna try a letter? You nearly refuse. But with trembling fingers, you lift the silver pen and lean over the parchment, your breath short and shallow like you're performing surgery. You write your first letter, something that vaguely looks like a spiraling G. You stop immediately. Your palm is drenched in sweat. The young man bursts out laughing. Relax. That almost looks like light. You're not sure if he's teasing or complimenting you. But what you do know, deep in your bones, is this: gold script isn't just expensive in gold. It's expensive in human effort. You sit down and chat with him for a long time. He tells you he's a fifth-generation gold dust maker, but hardly anyone wants to learn it now. Too slow. You know a single gold scroll pays less than what your city's wedding MCs make. But you're still doing it. Yet. My dad once said something to me. He scratches his head and smiles. The one who writes the gold won't shine, but he knows who will. You glance over at the unfinished manuscript on his desk. The gold is still drying, its edges shimmering faintly with an unfinished gleam. And suddenly, you remember why you came on this journey in the first place. You just wanted to know why would anyone write with gold dust, but now, you no longer ask why. You just sit there, quietly watching that tiny thread of gold light grow across the page. Like the first star appearing in the sky, slow, but certain. You've returned to Aksum, the place where your journey first began. The streets are just as lively as before. The cries of street vendors mix with the clip-clop of donkey carts, same as always. But now, the way you see things has changed. Now, your eyes catch the tiny golden marks above door frames, the fine script in the corners of signs, even the nearly faded gold speck on a stone wall. You know now, those aren't just decorations. They're clues. You wander along the edge of the marketplace, turning corners aimlessly, when suddenly you see a little girl haggling with an old man at a handwritten book stall. She's pointing at a book, her voice louder than the flatbread seller across the street. I want this one with the gold leaf, not the silver one. Silver's not holy enough. You blink in surprise. How does a kid know that silver isn't holy enough? The vendor chuckles. What do you know, little one, silver has ranks too. But his hands are already busy tucking the book with the gold-trimmed parchment into a cloth bag. You can't help but step forward and ask, is she a student? He raises an eyebrow. Of course. Over here, church schools start copy work in 3rd grade. Gold script that's the top-level recitation lesson. You stare. Gold script has to be recited. Of course, he grins. Reading it shows respect. Reciting it, that means letting it live inside you. You enter that ancient library again, but this time, you're not alone. You're with a group of students. They look no older than 11 or 12, each holding a parchment board and a small ink jar. Some have already learned how to prepare gold dust. A tall, wiry teacher leads them like a line of kittens walking into a temple. You follow quietly behind, watching them line up and sit in rows. Then the teacher asks, "Who can recite the passage of light today?" A boy with a red headscarf stands up. His voice is small, but his pronunciation is perfect, like morning light, piercing my bones. Like sun gold, lighting my heart's gate. When he finishes, the class lowers their heads and begins tracing a quiet rhythm with their fingers on the parchment boards, almost like they're writing in silence. You're struck by the contrast between their youth and the solemnity of it all. These kids are still losing baby teeth. And yet, they're already learning to work with light and gold. The teacher lets them take turns copying the passage. Only one student gets to use the gold ink today. It's the red headscarf boy's turn. He picks up the silver pen like he's handling a family heirloom. His fingers tremble. You feel the entire room hold its breath. Even the wind seems to wait outside the door. The moment his pen touches the parchment, you hear the faintest little tap. As if someone just knocked gently on the door of your heart. He writes very slowly. Each letter feels like it's being invented from scratch. When he finishes, he takes a deep breath and places the pen back in the clay dish. Only then does the class exhale in unison. The teacher nods and says, "Today's page is as clear as morning light." Then he turns to you. "Would you like to write a letter?" You can't move. Not because you're afraid of getting it wrong, but because you're afraid you're not ready. Afraid that in writing that first letter, you'd have to admit something, that you truly, deeply believe in this. You once thought this journey was just a fun historical adventure. You even planned to make a humorous vlog back home called Weird Gold Ink Facts from Ancient Ethiopia. But now you're standing among a group of children, facing a blank sheet of parchment. What you feel isn't curiosity anymore. It's responsibility. You inhale deeply. Then you write a letter, P.E. You're not sure what it means, but you remember what the gold dust craftsman told you yesterday. The one who writes the gold doesn't shine themselves, but they know who will. You set down the pen and stand. You nod toward the children. They don't applaud. They simply look away and lower their heads again, continuing their transcription as if silently saying, "You've been accepted." You smile. And you finally understand, you didn't come here to observe the gold script. You came here to become part of it. Your journey is almost over. You walk along the old post road leading out of Aksum, the sunlight hitting your backpack. Inside, that small piece of parchment has already started to curl at the edges. You had asked the library teacher to let you take that practice sheet with you. He hesitated for a long time, then simply said, "Don't let it shine only in your hands." You walk slowly. Each step feels like a replay of the past few weeks, the penmaker with the red ribbon, that cloud of gold dust as fine as smoke, the verse that painted faith in the language of morning light. You weren't conducting a historical investigation. You were relearning what it means to be human through the hands. You glance back in the direction of Aksum. Somewhere back there are hundreds of gold-dusted scrolls, dozens of silent scribes, and thousands of letters written in the space between heartbeats. And you finally understand, writing with gold dust isn't about luxury or showmanship. It's a ritual. A discipline so focused, it borders on faith. Like the way Tai Chi practitioners never rush their strikes. Like farmers sowing seeds just before dawn. Because they know the weight of gold dust isn't in its price. It's in the hands that once wrote with it. Now, you carry a new reverence for the act of writing. You think of the modern world typing furiously on keyboards, the careless flicks of your thumb on a phone screen. But those golden lines on parchment, they are the result of held breath, of stillness, of care. They are slow, cautious, fragile, radiant. Not because they are better than your words, but because they demand more. They ask a person to stop walking, sit down, grind ink, mix powder, hold their breath, lower the pen. This isn't just writing. It's something close to prayer. And you finally understand. Those priests in ancient robes, dusted with gold, weren't just being ceremonial. They were using their bodies to show the divine, look how much I gave to write this one sentence. And you stand beneath a tree. The parchment in your backpack rustles in the wind, like it's asking you, are you willing to write your own story the way gold dust is written? You don't answer. You simply fold it up, gently, and tuck it away. Then you start walking again. You don't know if you'll ever return to Aksum. You don't know if this journey will count as a success in the eyes of your viewers. But you do know one thing, you are no longer the same person who set out. You're lying in bed now, head resting on your pillow. Maybe there's a faint light nearby, or a fan humming softly in the background. As you close your eyes, try to picture this: somewhere far away on a highland, there were people who used the finest gold dust, stroke by stroke, to write their faith into time. Not to show off. Not to dazzle. But to slowly offer up the light inside them with every act of writing. You might not write with gold dust, but every word you say, every message you send, even the moments you choose to stay silent, those are all your golden marks on the world. Your hands may be empty, but your presence carries weight. Now, gently bring your focus back to your breath. Inhale like sprinkling gold dust into ink. Exhale like each letter settling softly onto the page. You've traveled all night. It's time to rest now. And everything you've seen will keep flowing in your dreams, like golden letters on parchment, still glistening, waiting for the morning light to shine through.